the favoritism that never faded. Audrey stood in the warm glow of the kitchen lights, gripping her framed medical school diploma like it was the only thing keeping her steady. The scent of vanilla and chocolate filled the air as her mother carefully arranged a tray of gourmet cupcakes on a glass stand. She hadn't even looked up when she spoke. "She deserves it more, honey," her mom said, adjusting a raspberry on top of one of the cupcakes. Audrey felt her stomach drop. Had she misheard? "Jessica's always been more dedicated to her studies," her mother continued casually, as if she weren't tearing Audrey apart with her words. "You've always had other interests." Audrey's throat tightened. She could feel the sharp sting of those words more than if her mother had slapped her across the face. Other interests? She had spent the last 8 years buried in textbooks, giving up sleep, social events, and even holidays to reach this moment, graduating medical school with honors. And yet, her mother spoke like she had been off on some leisurely adventure while Jessica, her twin sister, had been the only one truly working hard. Audrey swallowed the lump in her throat and tried to keep her voice steady. "Mom, we both graduated with honors. We had the exact same GPA," she said carefully. "I don't understand why you and Dad decided to pay off all of Jessica's student loans but none of mine." Her mother finally looked up, letting out a small sigh. Her face held that familiar expression, mild disappointment, like Audrey had asked something she should already know the answer to. "Audrey," her mother said, her tone patient but dismissive, "your sister doesn't have a wealthy mentor like Dr. Fleming taking an interest in her future. You've always had advantages Jessica didn't." Audrey blinked. For a moment, she actually thought she might laugh. Dr. Vivian Fleming wasn't some fairy godmother who had taken pity on her. She was Audrey's research advisor, a position Audrey had earned through endless nights in the lab, reviewing data and running experiments while Jessica was off skiing in Aspen with their parents. The so-called advantage her mother spoke of wasn't luck, it was sheer exhaustion and sacrifice. "So, I'm being punished for working hard and finding my own mentorship opportunities?" Audrey asked, struggling to keep her voice even. Before her mother could answer, her father walked into the kitchen, resting a hand on her mother's shoulder. His expression was calm, like this conversation was nothing more than a small misunderstanding. "No one is punishing you, Audrey," he said, "we're just being practical. Your sister needs more help than you do. You've always been more resourceful." Resourceful. That word again, the one they used whenever they wanted to justify giving Jessica more. It was the word they used when they skipped Audrey's undergraduate research presentations but flew across the country for Jessica's volleyball tournaments. It was the word they used when Jessica got a brand new car for her 21st birthday while Audrey received a $50 gas station gift card. It was the word they were using now to excuse leaving her with a mountain of debt while her sister got a free pass. Tomorrow was Jessica's debt-free celebration party, a party their parents had organized. The guest list included family members, Jessica's friends, and even some of their former professors. The invitation read "celebrating Jessica's achievement," as if the accomplishment had been hers, instead of their parents' financial decision. Audrey clenched her jaw. "I need to get going," she said finally, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I have an early shift at the hospital tomorrow." "Will you still make it to Jessica's party?" her mother asked. For the first time, she sounded concerned, but Audrey knew the concern wasn't for her, it was for Jessica, for how her absence might cast a shadow on her sister's big day. Audrey forced a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be there," she promised, even as the thought made her stomach twist. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a message from Dr. Fleming. "Need to speak with you urgently about the Patterson Fellowship." Big news. Audrey stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The Patterson Fellowship was one of the most prestigious in the country, something that could change the course of her career. She exhaled slowly as realization settled over her like a weight. Her parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair. It was about to become publicly humiliating. And there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. A night of revelations. The room buzzed with conversation as guests enjoyed their meals, the atmosphere warm with celebration. My parents sat at the head of the table, looking every bit the proud hosts of the evening. The debt-free graduation party for Jessica was in full swing, and everything had gone exactly as they planned. Dad stood, clearing his throat, and the room gradually quieted. He smiled broadly, lifting his glass. "It has been a long and grueling journey," he said, his voice filled with pride. Medical school is no small feat, and to come out not only with a degree but also without debt is truly something special. The room responded with polite applause. People nodded, some clapped, and a few guests even gave small cheers. But from where I sat, I could see Jessica's face shift. She smiled, but it was tight, uneasy. The attention on her wasn't sitting well. Mom stood beside Dad, placing a hand on his arm as she added her own words. We're blessed to have been able to support Jessica throughout her education. It's something every parent hopes to do for their children, and we're so proud of her accomplishments. There it was, a simple sentence, yet so powerful in its meaning. We supported Jessica. Not our daughters, but Jessica. A sharp sting settled in my chest, and I suddenly found it hard to breathe. My fingers tightened around my glass as I fought back the emotions welling up inside me. The message was clear: they had invested in Jessica, not in both of us. The applause rang out again, a room full of family members, old friends, and even some of our former professors clapped for Jessica's achievement. No one seemed to notice me sitting there, holding my untouched drink, my own diploma, a match to Jessica's, completely ignored. Until Jessica stood up. Actually, she said, raising her voice over the fading applause, I'd like to say something. The room fell silent. She turned towards me, and to my surprise, her expression was full of something I never expected: regret. This celebration feels incomplete, she said, her voice calm but firm. Audrey and I both graduated with identical GPAs. We both worked incredibly hard, and, frankly, Audrey worked even harder than I did because she did it without the support system I had. A murmur rippled through the room, followed by an almost eerie silence. I froze. For the first time in my life, my sister was saying the words I had been too afraid to voice myself. She was publicly acknowledging the truth I had swallowed for years. It hit me like a wave, both vindicating and painful all at once. Jessica turned to face me. I wouldn't be standing here without Mom and Dad's help. But Audrey? She did everything I did on her own, and it's not fair to celebrate my journey while ignoring hers. For a moment, I thought I saw something like guilt flicker across my parents' faces, but before they could react, my father recovered, his voice overly cheerful. Of course, we're proud of Audrey too, he said, smiling a little too hard. She's done very well, but tonight is about celebrating Jessica being debt-free, which is a special achievement. I felt my stomach twist. An achievement you paid for, not one she earned. But I stayed quiet. I'd learned long ago that arguing with my parents was like shouting into the wind. Then, unexpectedly, another voice spoke up. If I might add something to this conversation, Vivian Fleming said, rising from her chair. Her voice, sharp yet commanding, cut through the tension with ease. The room turned to face her. Even my parents, who usually commanded every room they were in, looked suddenly unsure. Fleming clasped her hands together and looked around. This is actually the perfect time to share something about Audrey, something I think many of you don't know yet. My heart stuttered in my chest. My parents' expressions shifted, their smiles faltering as they exchanged a wary glance. It was as if they sensed that something was about to shake the carefully curated image of their perfect family. Fleming turned to me, her eyes warm and proud. Audrey's research on neurovascular regeneration has earned her the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, she announced, her voice carrying through the silent room. It's one of the most prestigious fellowships in the country, awarded to only the most promising medical researchers. The selection committee specifically highlighted Audrey's innovative dual-approach methodology, which she developed largely independently while balancing a full clinical rotation schedule. There was a beat of stunned silence, and then, suddenly, the room erupted in applause. My cousins, who had barely spoken to me all night, were whispering excitedly. Some of my former professors who had come for Jessica's celebration were now looking at me with newfound interest. Even Dar Wu, one of the top physicians at our hospital, nodded at me in approval. I swallowed hard. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to say something, but I was too focused on the one reaction that mattered most: our parents. Mom's face was frozen in a stunned half-smile, as if she was trying to process what had just happened. Dad, ever the diplomat, gave a forced chuckle. Of course, we're proud of both our girls, he said, his voice too bright, too smooth. Audrey has done very well too, but tonight is about celebrating Jessica being debt-free, which is a special achievement. I stared at him, my hands curling into fists. Jessica, however, wasn't having it. Dad, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the forced cheer, you keep saying that, but let's be honest, it's an achievement you made possible for me, and you know it. I can't just stand here and act like Audrey didn't accomplish just as much, more. Honestly, she's the one who's truly remarkable. Jessica turned back to me, her eyes filled with something different now, pride. I mean, the Patterson Fellowship, she said, shaking her head in amazement. Why didn't you tell me? I hesitated. I only found out this morning, and I didn't want to take attention away from your night. Jessica frowned. Audrey, this whole thing was Mom and Dad's idea. I tried to tell them it was unfair, but you know how they get when they've already decided something. I blinked in surprise. You said something to them? Of course I did. I've known for a while how much they favor me, and I hated it, she admitted, but I was too scared to stand up to them. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. I should have done it sooner. I barely had time to process her words before Dr. Margaret Wu, one of the most well-respected figures in our field, approached. Dr. Collins, she said, addressing me directly. My parents turned their heads toward me, frowning slightly at the honorific. I was very impressed by Dr. Fleming's announcement. We should talk about the possibility of you bringing your expertise to Detroit after your fellowship. We'd be fortunate to have you. I gaped at her. That's very flattering, Dr. Wu, but I only found out about the Patterson this morning. I hadn't even considered. Jessica cut in with a beaming smile, but she's already accepted it. Dr. Wu, can you believe it? The Patterson Fellowship. I've been telling her for years she was meant for something huge, and she never believed me. She slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me in. If she decides to come back to Detroit after Johns Hopkins, you'll be getting one of the best. Dr. Wu smiled approvingly. Well, we'd be honored to have you. I glanced across the room. Our parents were making their way toward us, but their pace had slowed. They were stopping every few feet, forced to nod and smile as more guests offered their congratulations, not to Jessica, but to me. Jessica nudged me. They're coming. You ready for this? I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and nodded. Not really, I admitted. She squeezed my hand. Well, you're not alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed her.